The fire alarm went off at 6:43 a.m. in Warehouse 12, but not because of an actual fire. The system short-circuited trying to reconcile two identical orders sent to the same vendor from two different departments. Double billing, double shipping. Nobody noticed until pallets started showing up with the same SKU stamp twice. One marked Priority CEO, the other Urgent Strategy Team. That's when I knew Nexus was coughing. Not crashing, just coughing, clearing its throat in that quiet, ugly way before all hell breaks loose. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I'm Calvin Pierce, 48 years old, and 2 weeks before that fire alarm, I was sitting under my desk at 3 a.m., energy drink in one hand and diagnostic tablet in the other, trying to figure out why Nexus had randomly decided that all January birthdays deserved double overtime pay. That wasn't a glitch. Was Carlos in payroll trying to rig the system again so his nephew could afford spring break? I fixed it silently, logged it, let it go. That was the deal. I kept Nexus breathing, and in return, the company let me live in peace. No team-building exercises, no forced birthday celebrations, no meetings that could have been an email. Just me, my machines, and a jungle of code that looked like spaghetti cooked by a blindfolded raccoon. Nexus wasn't pretty, but it worked because I worked. 15 years I'd been nursing this system, ever since my Navy days taught me that when something breaks at 2 a.m. in the middle of the Pacific, you better know how to fix it yourself. Back in my Navy IT days, I'd kept carrier communication systems running through typhoons and equipment failures that would make civilian techs cry. 20 years of that taught me something corporate America never understood. Systems don't fail dramatically. They fail quietly, one small error at a time, until someone who knows what they're looking for notices the pattern. Most people wait for the explosion. I learned to listen for the whisper. When I left the Navy at 33, I had 2 kids starting middle school, an ex-wife who needed regular child support, and a skill set that made me valuable to exactly one type of company, the kind that had grown too fast and built their IT infrastructure like a house of cards. Apex Industries was perfect. They needed someone who could take their mess of interconnected systems and make them actually work. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't loud, but I was necessary, whether they knew it or not. I was the one who patched the procurement loop after their digital transformation failed spectacularly. I was the one who built the back end that let HR pretend they understood metrics. I was the one who designed the failsafes that rerouted critical shipments before customers noticed delays. But I didn't speak at town halls. I didn't wear ties. I didn't use buzzwords like synergy or disruptive innovation. So the executives forgot I existed. Only the staff on the 3rd floor even knew what I looked like. Diane in logistics called me the wizard in the server room. Carlos in accounting once left me a note that said, "Thanks for fixing the printer again. You're the only reason I haven't thrown it out the window." I kept that one, put it on my toolbox. The kids were in college now, both of them on partial scholarships I'd helped fund by working every overtime hour Apex would give me. Sarah was studying engineering at State, following in her old man's footsteps. Michael was pre-med, smarter than I'd ever been, determined to fix people instead of machines. Their mother and I had our differences, but we both wanted the same thing. Those kids succeeding in ways we never could. So yeah, maybe my company card had a few charges labeled cybersecurity certification and 0-day mitigation workshop. And maybe I submitted them every quarter like clockwork, but nobody questioned it. Not finance, not HR, not even the VP of operations. Why? Because when Nexus hiccuped, people lost bonuses. When Nexus failed, people lost jobs. When Nexus died, well, we'll get to that. I kept my world simple. Quiet updates at night. System reports routed through my console. Admin keys rotated weekly. And yes, I backed everything up off-site, triple encrypted, and tied to biometric access. You think I trust some sales guy with access to anything past his Outlook calendar? The man once clicked on a "You've won a Tesla" pop-up and bricked his laptop twice in 1 week. They called the system Nexus because it connected everything: logistics, payroll, vendor timelines, internal ticket routing, budget syncing, shift schedules, compliance flags, even the coffee machine orders for the break room. If you unplugged me, the lights would still be on, but nothing would move. You'd have a Ferrari with no key, no gas, and the engine password protected behind 3 firewalls and a smiley face sticker that said, "Nice try." Those training courses Bradley would later call unauthorized They weren't courses. They were enterprise-grade security certifications that had probably prevented $45,000 worth of cyber incidents over the past 2 years. The kind of attacks that would have made headlines if they'd succeeded. But nobody reads the nothing happened reports. But nobody asked about Nexus. They just assumed it worked like magic. And I kept it that way until he showed up. Bradley Hudson. If arrogance were a cologne, he'd bathe in it. Perfectly styled hair, designer suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and freshly minted into HR management because nepotism is a ladder and his daddy owns the building. Word was he'd gotten his MBA from some prestigious school and thought that made him qualified to run operations he'd never touched. His father, Walter Hudson, had built Apex from nothing 25 years ago. Good man, from what I'd heard. Understood that success meant keeping the machinery running, not just talking about it. But Walter was getting ready to step back, and Bradley was being groomed to take over. Problem was, the kid thought management meant managing spreadsheets, not people or systems. On Bradley's 3rd day, he asked my supervisor, "Why is this Calvin person expensing $3,400 on training courses without approval?" My supervisor, God bless him, replied, "Because if he stops learning, hackers start earning, and our insurance company stops covering us." Bradley didn't laugh. He went straight to finance, straight to compliance, straight to the CEO, his father. And I knew the minute I saw him print out one of my expense reports on premium paper and slam it on the conference table like he was dropping the Declaration of Independence, the countdown had started. The meeting was supposed to be about Q3 productivity metrics, a 90-minute PowerPoint about why pizza parties should make up for canceled bonuses. I showed up because the invite said mandatory, and I wasn't about to give HR ammunition for some compliance violation. I sat in the back like always, hoodie up, nursing black coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through gym socks. Nobody noticed me. Nobody ever did. Not until Bradley clicked to slide 7 and made my name the headline. "Let's talk about accountability," he said, smiling like a shark that just smelled blood in the water. The room went quiet. My name sat there in bold calibri, Calvin P. Ongoing non-compliance with expense policy. I blinked. He didn't look at me. Not yet. He was feeding off the power of silence. "I conducted a review of recent expenses," Bradley continued, projecting his voice like he was auditioning for a courtroom drama. "Multiple charges from this employee who, as far as I can tell, operates unsupervised, items that were never approved by HR or finance, courses, licenses, whatever he wants to call them." He turned to me finally. The room followed, neck by neck, like dominoes toppling toward a cliff. "Calvin," he said, "would you like to explain why you've been using company funds for personal development without authorization?" I could have explained. Could have told him about the enterprise security modules that kept our customer data from ending up on the dark web. Could have mentioned the 0-day vulnerability patches that prevented 3 separate breach attempts last year. Could have walked him through the cost-benefit analysis showing how $3,400 in training prevented an estimated $45,000 in security incidents. Instead, I just looked at him. Kid thought he was playing chess when he was really just knocking over checkers pieces. "I've already cleared this with the CEO," he went on, raising his voice like he was delivering a verdict. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Please surrender your badge and log out of all systems. Security will escort you if necessary." Ever hear a room hold its breath? You could feel the temperature drop. The air went still, like even the molecules were waiting to see if I'd cry, scream, beg, throw my coffee cup. Bradley stood there with his hands clasped, like a Disney villain, thinking he'd just solved the company's biggest problem. What he didn't realize was that he'd just pulled the pin on a grenade and was holding it like a trophy. I stood up calmly. No twitch, no tremor, just a slow rise and a glance around the room. Half the engineers looked like they'd swallowed their tongues. Sarah from IT actually started typing with her laptop still half closed, probably trying to figure out what this meant for her. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my ID badge, walked to the center of the room, and placed it gently on the long, glossy conference table next to the coffee carafe like I was leaving a tip. Then I looked at Bradley. Just once. "The automated failsafes will kick in within a few hours," I said quietly. "When my access credentials expire, you'll see what unsupervised really looks like." He blinked. "Excuse me? Good luck." And then I walked out. No mic drop, No grand speech, just those 2 words. He laughed. That forced little chuckle people do when they're unsure if they've been insulted. "Was that a threat?" he called out. But I was already gone. Elevator doors closing, the world going mute. Last thing I saw was his reflection in the polished chrome, all teeth and confusion. What nobody in that room knew, what Bradley never bothered to learn, was that Nexus didn't just run logistics, it was logistics. Payroll, dispatch, invoicing, deadline tracking, compliance alerts, supplier validation, the invisible skeleton of the company. And they'd just fired the skeleton. I hadn't built it for power. I'd built it because it needed to work. Because when something broke, they called me at 3 a.m. Because when the vendor database misfired, I fixed it before anyone noticed. Because no one else could. But Bradley thought I was just another middle-aged drone siphoning corporate dollars to fund Netflix binges and tech hobby courses. He didn't realize those certifications were enterprise-grade access tools. He didn't know the licensing agreements were tied directly to my personal credentials. No multi-user login, no admin override, just one name, one fingerprint. Mine. The elevator opened to the 3rd floor with a chime that felt louder than usual. I stepped out and walked past the break room where someone was microwaving leftover pizza. They saw me, looked like they wanted to say something, then didn't. Smart. My cubicle was still the same, half-dead cactus on the windowsill. A broken bobblehead I'd glued back together after last year's office party. 2 coffee mugs, both mine, both stained like they'd been through war. On my desk, a photo of Sarah and Michael at their high school graduation, both of them grinning like they owned the world. They probably would someday. I sat down and pulled out my backpack. No tears, no dramatic slamming of drawers, just the soft shuffle of cables and backup drives sliding into pockets. I heard whispers from behind the partition. "Did he really get fired?" someone hissed. "He's the only one who knows the server passwords," another voice mumbled. "I thought he was the system," said a third. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody asked. That's the thing about offices. They'll watch you burn through the glass, but they won't tap on it. Liability, I guess. I reached into my bottom drawer and pulled out a USB stick. Black, no logo, no label except one thing. A strip of masking tape across the plastic with "Good luck" written in Sharpie. I set it gently on my chair cushion, right in the center. No drama, no fireworks, just a tiny silent explanation for whoever came looking. Inside that USB stick was everything, not passwords or access codes. I wasn't that petty, just documentation. System architecture diagrams, dependency maps, emergency protocols, the 124-page handover document I'd written 6 months ago and sent to Bradley's inbox. The one he'd never bothered to read. Everything they'd need to understand what they'd just lost. I zipped up my bag, slipped on my jacket, and walked out with the kind of stillness you only learn after 20 years of fixing broken systems in the dark. Nexus had 23 failsafes, each one tied to a trigger. One of those triggers was my leaving the building without administrator handoff, the first domino. Bradley didn't know it, but he'd started a countdown disguised as efficiency. I walked past security with a nod, past the CEO's framed photo with the mayor, past the motivational poster that said, "Teamwork makes the dream work," next to the fire extinguisher I'd once used to stop a server from overheating during the Q4 rush last year. Out through the glass doors and into the parking lot, the air was crisp. Freedom smells like car exhaust and coffee grounds when you've been breathing recycled office air for 15 years. I didn't cry, didn't scream at the sky or kick over a trash can. I just sat in my truck, pulled out my personal phone, and sent one text message. Trigger acknowledged. Key rotation engaged. Timeline active. Then I drove away. No plan to return, no exit interview, no follow-up call. But that USB stick, that was a gift. Or maybe a warning. Depends on who picks it up first. It started with a missed shipment. Just one. A truck loaded with industrial equipment samples meant for the Chicago trade show didn't leave the dock. The shipping label printed blank. The route manifest spit out a page filled with question marks and a single error icon that looked suspiciously like a shrugging emoji. The warehouse manager flagged it as a printer error. Resent the job. Same thing. Then logistics tried rerouting through the backup system. That's when Nexus told them the backup system didn't exist. Or rather, it existed last week. Now it was nothing but a digital shrug, redirecting them to a deprecated error page I'd buried behind 5 layers of do not touch warnings. 2 hours later, payroll called down to IT, not panicked, just annoyed. Hey, half our direct deposits are stuck in draft status, the other half just disappeared. They tried to run the report again, got a timeout message, rebooted the console, got locked out, attempted to escalate to admin level. Nexus bounced back a cheery red banner. Access denied. You are not the chosen one. That was one of mine. I'd written it during a late-night patch cycle as a joke. Nobody had ever changed it because nobody had ever seen it. Until now. By hour 3, Bradley was holding his first change acceleration meeting, pretending nothing was wrong. Just a few hiccups, he said, adjusting his tie. Growing pains from legacy system issues. His exact words were, "Let's not catastrophize minor glitches." That phrase would later be printed on coffee mugs by several bitter staffers. Downstairs in IT, Sarah was sweating through her college sweatshirt. She'd inherited my office, my systems, and the faint lingering scent of burnt coffee and 15 years of late-night fixes. Now her dashboard looked like a Christmas tree decorated by someone having a seizure. Every light blinked red, every ping returned static. Every recovery attempt was met with a wall that said, "Admin validation expired. Manual override required. Good luck." Up in operations, Diane started piecing it together. "Didn't Calvin handle Nexus?" she asked during a staff meeting. Silence. I mean, wasn't he the main admin? Nobody answered. Sarah, bless her 22-year-old heart, whispered, "I thought he was like part of the system, like some AI thing." Diane stood up and walked straight to HR, asked for access to my old files, found them password protected, called IT. No answer. Called legal. That's when the real panic started. Legal tried to access compliance reports for a vendor audit due in 24 hours. Nexus responded with a spinning wheel, then spit out a gif of a raccoon setting a dumpster on fire. That was definitely mine. Upstairs, Bradley's inbox was lighting up like a slot machine hitting jackpot. Subject lines included urgent, system offline, payroll error, vendor crisis, and FYI, mild panic in finance. Still, he waved it off. Told his assistant to schedule a systems calibration task force for next week. Someone from procurement burst into his office mid-sentence. "We just got billed twice by a supplier that doesn't exist," they said, breathing hard. Bradley blinked. "That can't happen." Well, it just did. And the vendor ID is tagged, "Calvin P. was right." His smile twitched. He called IT. Sarah didn't answer. She was too busy trying to remember if she'd ever seen a manual for any of this. He called Walter Hudson, his father, the CEO. "Hey, quick thing," Bradley said, trying to sound casual. "Need to reset some credentials tied to our automation system. You know, Nexus." There was a pause. "Isn't that Calvin's system?" Bradley's confidence cracked slightly. No, I mean, he worked with it, but it's a company asset, right?" Longer pause. "I'll call him," Walter said and hung up. By hour 4, people were walking to meetings in person, always a sure sign that the scheduling system had failed. Someone in finance whispered, "Should we call Calvin?" Bradley spun in his chair. "Absolutely not." But his voice cracked. The first contractor showed up at 10 p.m. that night, wearing a polo shirt with some forgettable tech company logo and holding a travel mug that probably said coffee equals debugging fuel. Bradley ushered him into the server room like he was presenting the crown jewels. "Calvin's files should be in there," Bradley said, gesturing vaguely at the blinking racks. The contractor plugged in his laptop, tapped a few keys, then frowned. "I'm going to need root access." Bradley's smile held, but his tone shifted. "Just override it." The contractor sighed like a man realizing his hourly rate wasn't high enough. "Sir, I can't override a system I'm not authorized to touch. Everything's encrypted. The credential trees are all tied to one account, Calvin P. Admin Root. That's a closed chain system. Even the reboot commands require signature verification." "It's just software," Bradley insisted. "No, sir, this is architecture. Custom self-locking. It's like trying to fly a plane when you realize it doesn't come with a steering wheel unless you happen to be the original pilot." The contractor left an hour later with a free company pen and a 1,000-yard stare. By midnight, they'd brought in 2 more firms. One sent a guy who kept calling the servers bro. The other tried to brute force entry through a maintenance port. Nexus responded by shutting down the entire non-essential server cluster and sending a company-wide Slack notification. Unauthorized activity detected. Sleep mode activated. Sweet dreams, Sarah. Sarah, still sweating in my old chair, nearly fainted. By 5 hours, everything critical was offline. Not crashed, just gone. Like someone had gently unplugged the nervous system of a sleeping giant. Legal was involved. The board was involved. Worse, so was Walter Hudson, who'd been blissfully unaware of the growing digital hurricane until his own calendar app failed to remind him of the quarterly earnings call. He walked into an empty conference room with no prep notes, no CFO, no script, just 5 chairs spinning slightly in the air-conditioning breeze. When he finally stormed into the emergency operations meeting, Bradley was halfway through his latest excuse. "It's legacy infrastructure," Bradley said, arms crossed defensively. "Calvin didn't document his work properly. We were set up to fail." "Calvin was the documentation," said the CTO, who hadn't spoken all quarter. "We all knew that. You just didn't think it mattered." Bradley tried to pivot. "Look, he misused company funds." "The licenses were approved," interrupted the CFO, sliding a thick file across the table. "They're attached to valid project codes, all under budget. Most are prepaid through next year." He expensed $3,400 in security training, Bradley protested. Training that prevented an estimated $45,000 in security incidents last year alone, added the InfoSec lead. Those certifications kept us compliant with federal requirements and off 2 cybersecurity watch lists. Walter rubbed his temples. "Where are the backups?" Silence. "Are there backups?" he asked again, slower. Sarah cleared her throat from the back of the room. "There are partial snapshots, but..." The access keys to sync the backup servers were also tied to Calvin's signature. Bradley, sweating now, tried to regain control. "This isn't permanent. We'll patch it, rebuild from scratch if we have to." The CTO laughed, actually laughed. "It would take 12 to 15 months and over $1.5 million, and we'd still never replicate what he built in 15 years. He didn't create a product. He created a spine." That's when Walter ordered the full audit. Not of Nexus, of everything. Vendor accounts, payment structures, infrastructure dependencies, admin access logs, HR workflows, Bradley's decision-making process. Every thread Calvin had touched, managed, or protected. The more they dug, the worse it got. Calvin hadn't just built Nexus, he was Nexus. Every license tied to his credentials, every workflow connected to his access keys, every emergency bypass routed through Calvin P. Root admin, and now that identity didn't exist in the system anymore. Bradley had deleted it. By Thursday, the office smelled like desperation masked with industrial air freshener. The usual cliques dissolved into anxious hallway conversations and whispered questions nobody wanted to answer. Even the VP of strategy, who hadn't spoken to anyone without a graduate degree in years, was seen hovering by the server room with a protein bar and confusion he couldn't articulate. The CFO called an emergency finance meeting. The kind where emergency sounds manageable but feels like getting dragged behind a truck. "Pull every record on Calvin's expense reports," she ordered, laptop open like she was defusing a bomb. 45 minutes later, they weren't speaking in numbers anymore. They were speaking in horror. First discovery. Calvin's unauthorized courses weren't courses at all. They were enterprise licenses, multi-factor encryption modules, adaptive security algorithms, proprietary supply chain protection tools, software you couldn't even buy without federal clearance. And Calvin had purchased them at discounted military contractor rates through connections he'd established in year 2. All legal, all under budget, all approved by Bradley's predecessor. Second discovery. Every purchase was registered to Calvin P. Enterprise and cross-referenced to internal project codes that matched Nexus's core framework. Third discovery. The licenses were non-refundable, non-transferable, and region-locked to the original operator. Any attempt to override or reassign the credentials would trigger immediate invalidation of the entire software suite. That's when the real panic set in. Diane from logistics had the final piece. She found Calvin's handover documentation, 124 pages, step by step, labeled, "In case I get hit by a bus." It had sat unopened in Bradley's inbox for 6 months, unread, time-stamped, traceable. Walter stared at it on his laptop screen, lips pressed into a thin line. He turned to legal. "If we offer him a consulting contract, can we restore access?" Legal shook their heads. The only way to unlock the infrastructure is if Calvin agrees to regenerate the certificates manually, in person, on-site, with biometric confirmation. Silence filled the room like smoke. "We'll rebuild Nexus," Bradley said, voice dry as paper. Walter looked at his son for a long moment. "You're reassigned to strategic planning, effective Monday. No operational authority." What they didn't know was that Calvin wasn't hiding. He wasn't plotting revenge in some dark basement like a disgruntled IT stereotype. He was busy, new office, new badge, new business cards that read Calvin Pierce, Senior Systems Architect, Pinnacle Solutions, the company that had been quietly courting him for 3 years, the same company that handled IT consulting for Apex Industries' biggest competitors. His first assignment? Help those competitors understand what happens when critical infrastructure depends on a single point of knowledge, and what to do when that knowledge walks out the door. Calvin didn't burn bridges. He became the bridge to somewhere better. His starting salary was $78,000, a $23,000 increase from Apex. Full benefits, stock options, and a signing bonus that covered Sarah's spring semester tuition with money left over. More importantly, they respected what he knew instead of taking it for granted. At exactly 5:01 p.m. on day 3, every executive at Apex Industries received the same email. Subject line, Nexus Final Certification Status. The message was short, clinical, professional. Per automated security protocol, admin key. Calvin P. root access has been permanently deactivated. System recovery requires physical reauthorization from original certifying administrator. This process cannot be reversed remotely. Good luck. No signature, no contact information, no reply option. Attached was a single PDF, a scanned copy of Bradley's termination memo, covered in red annotations. Each arrow pointed to a procedural violation, a legal oversight, a breach of company policy. At the bottom, in precise red text, termination executed without proper systems transfer, infrastructure liability confirmed. Just then, Slack lit up. Not a message from someone. A message from Nexus itself. The final ghost in the machine. Company-wide notification. No filters, no permissions, visible to everyone. Good luck. You had a few hours, nothing else. Just those 6 words hanging on every screen like smoke. 3 months later, Apex Industries was still running on expensive temporary patches and borrowed time. They'd spent $75,000 on emergency contractors and were facing a $1.2 million rebuild estimate. Calvin Pierce was designing the IT infrastructure for their biggest competitor's new facility, and every time someone at his new job asked how he knew so much about enterprise system failures, Calvin would just smile and say, "Experience. Hard-earned experience." The fire alarm in Warehouse 12 was just the beginning. The real alarm was the sound of a company finally realizing what they'd lost, and by then, it was much too late.